I'd like to remind you that for more Microsoft webcasts, you can go to microsoft.com/webcasts. Thanks again for joining us for today's presentation, SharePoint Server 2007 and Business Intelligence. It is my pleasure to introduce today's presenters, Mike Bankovich and Lynn Langet, who are MSCN Developer Evangelists. And now I'll turn the floor over to Mike.
Hey, and thank you, Heather, and I want to welcome everyone to today's webcast. We're talking today about SharePoint Server 2007 and Business Intelligence. And we actually have someone who's done quite a bit with Business Intelligence today to lead us, and that is going to be Lynn. So I'm going to turn it over to Lynn. You take it away, and if there's any questions, I'll try to pipe in and help bring us along.
Great. Well, hi to everybody listening in. If you're new to the series, this is part, 11 or 12 of a multi-part series that keeps growing. We're up to 13 parts of SharePoint for developers. So if you are new to this and you want to get more information after we're done, go out to our blogs, which are listed on this first slide, and you can search on SharePoint and pull down and download the previous iterations of the series. Today's topic is one that both Mike and I are particularly fond of, business intelligence, or effective reporting using data warehousing technologies based on SQL Server 2005, because we've had a real-world experience and we've actually both written books on the topic. Mike's book was written back in the 2000 version, and I don't have a reference right in front of me, and my book was released in April of this year. So we'll talk in today's session, and let me just jump right in here, about the interoperability between business intelligence technologies and SharePoint Server, and you'll get a brief introduction to data warehousing in SQL Server 2005 as well. You will get the most out of this session if you have a background with database development. It won't only focus on OLAP or data warehousing concepts, and OLAP stands for Online Analytical Processing, or generally a read-only data store, which is structured in the shape of a cube rather than multiple tables. We'll also talk about effective reporting or business intelligence based off of OLTP, or online transactional, or more sort of typical normalized data structures housed in a relational data store, kind of like SQL Server or one of the competitive products as well. So really a variety of data sources. And of course the focus of today's presentation will be on the integration and the end user experience in SharePoint and how you as a developer can impact that. So to that end, we're going to attempt to cover in 1 hour, and we'll see how far we get here, because of course, like all of our webcasts, we will focus on answering as many of your questions as is possible during the webcast, and that's why we have two presenters for these webcasts. And whatever we don't get answered during the webcast, we will answer post-webcast, or you can actually email us through our blogs, and we'll be happy to answer them that way as well, because we really want to provide you with information that you can use. So the agenda is we're going to just take a brief look at what Microsoft's definition of business intelligence is and what products are available in the suite for you to work with, and then look just briefly at the sample that's provided so you can see the data store that we'll be using. We'll then look at the new component inside of MOS, or SharePoint Server 2007, called Report Center, which is the sort of starting platform for you as a developer for you to design a reporting solution. We'll look at some of the components inside of the Report Center, specifically KPIs, or key performance indicators, and show you what comes out of the box and how you can work with them from a development standpoint. We'll have a sort of a brief overview of the BDC, or the Business Data Catalog, in terms of how it relates to reporting. Mike and I actually did an entire 1 hour webcast on the BDC. So if you're very interested in more of a technical drill down, you can also pull that webcast. We'll then look at Excel services in SharePoint Server, and then talk about integration between SQL Server reporting services and SharePoint Server. So we've got a lot to cover in this hour, so we'll see how far we can get.
That's a full plate.
Yeah, yes it is. To that end, we're going to start by just diving in. Those of you that are new to this series, you'll know that both Mike and I are not big fans of slides. Rather, we prefer to do lots and lots of demos that will spark questions on your side. So we're going to move over and dive in and just start looking at what business intelligence is. And to start with this, what I have done is I've got a virtual PC, and inside of this virtual PC I've got SQL Server 2005 installed, and I've opened up SQL Server Management Studio. If you're new to SQL Server 2005, this is the replacement for the old Enterprise Manager, and one of the enhancements is you can see that you have both the ability to connect to a traditional or relational SQL database store and an analytical database store or an OLAP store. So if you've got really, really good eyes or good screen resolution, you can see that the icon for the relational store is a cylinder and the icon for the multidimensional store is a cube. So we've got both of these data sources. And we're going to come back in just a minute and take a look at how this looks from a administrator/developer standpoint, because this graphical user interface, of course, is not for end users. That's where we're going with SharePoint. But I realize that many of you on this call may be somewhat unfamiliar with online analytical technologies or data warehousing, so I want you to see the structure as it exists first before we put it into SharePoint. Before we do that, however, I just want to jump out and show you a couple of things. The first thing is, of course, I have to plug my book. So there it is, Foundations of SQL Server 2005 Business Intelligence. It's written for you, basically. It's written for people who are interested in getting into the OLAP world, who have developer experience, particularly database developer experience, and really haven't gotten started. So it covers how to work with SQL Server Analysis Services, SQL Server Integration Services, SQL Server Reporting Services, and the integration with SharePoint 2007. So it's really kind of a next step if you get intrigued after today's webcast. The other thing that I want to point out, because I've had a lot of questions come to me post-webcast, is that when you're looking on my blog, I know I have literally hundreds of entries because I'm a very I blog very frequently because I just think it's an efficient way to put information out to all of you. So if you're looking for information, you can just simply search on my blog, which is blogs.mstn.com, SoCalDevGal, or I've been very diligent in tagging everything. So you can tag, you can just click on the MOS or the SharePoint tag, and you can find all the SharePoint information. So I'm happy to answer questions via email, but really do try to look on my blog first, because you'll find a lot of the information you're looking for is probably there. Okay, the other thing that I want to talk about, because this is a really common sort of question area, is what works in what you're showing me in Windows SharePoint Services 3.0 versus MOS, the full SharePoint server. And again, I put this very recently, a link to this poster very recently up onto my blog, and I know it's very hard to see, probably because of screen resolution, but sort of at a high level, anything below this line is part of WSS. So in essence, the free version of the product, I say free in quotes because if you are going to use WSS for collaboration, you're probably going to have to get a couple of servers, one for the IIS, WSS front end, one for the SQL back end, so on and so forth. So if you're using it in production, it's usually not completely free, but it's free in terms of SharePoint technologies. Now the reason I mention this is because I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. You might be able to see up in the upper left, Business Intelligence. I'll make it a little bit bigger. Everything that we're going to look at today requires the full MOS, Microsoft Office SharePoint server. So the features that we're looking at today require the full server. And this is one of the few webcasts that we've done that's very sort of specific to that. So if you look inside of here, you can see that in the Business Intelligence quadrant, we've got Excel Services, which is in essence centralizing report information onto Excel spreadsheets that are actually rendered out by SharePoint itself. And we have reporting and dashboards. Now, in addition to requiring the full MOS server, because again I get this question very, very frequently when I speak about SharePoint to live groups, so I just want to address it to this group as well. Not only do you have to make a decision about which version, so I'm telling you you have to get the full MOS server, but certain of these features require the premium version of Office, and Excel Services is one of them. And then if I move over here, under Business Process Integration, you'll see the Business Data Catalog, which allows us to connect to basically any data source, and is actually obviously very, very relevant in terms of reporting and a business intelligence solution. This also requires the premium edition of MOS. So in terms of understanding which products and which tools, I highly recommend actually that all of you that are considering new development get this poster, because I think it's just very clear about which pieces and parts are associated to which versions of the product, and it's just such a common question area. The other thing that I want to point out is this poster is designed for developers. If I go over into the bottom corner here and I look at the key, you can see it's actually color-coded by what are the current features, what are the new features, and how you work with them. So I just think it's a very well done poster. And I wanted to kind of start our talk by looking at that. Okay, so we're going to be working in sort of the premium area of SharePoint. I wanted to preface that. Now, before we look at SharePoint, as I said when I first got into the demo, it's really, really important when you're designing a reporting solution, whether it's integrated with SharePoint or just whatever UI you're providing, that you build your house on the proper foundation. And I've done quite a bit of real-world work in this before I joined Microsoft. In fact, for the last 18 months before I joined Microsoft in February of this year, I was exclusively working in the BI space, so customers small and large. And although some solutions will be built on the relational store, and what I mean by that is you serve your typical, and we'll use as an example, AdventureWorks. Typical normalized database, and that will be an adequate solution for some people. What it's important for you to think about as developers when you're beginning an enterprise reporting project is which data stores are going to be most appropriate for my particular project. So again, AdventureWorks, we're very, very familiar with this. It's just a series of normalized tables. So we've got production, products, we've got locations, so on and so forth. We have 50, 100, 250 tables, and reporting consists of writing a whole lot of SQL code, whether you encapsulate it into views, stored procedures, or how you do it. You're writing a whole lot of SQL code to join or reunify those tables. You're spending a lot of time, you're spending some time also optimizing the indexing against those queries to make sure that they run appropriately. The challenge with creating a BI solution against a relational store does lie within writing that SQL in an efficient manner and indexing appropriately. That can become, in an enterprise environment, not only a job for one person, it can become a job for many, many people. I had an enterprise customer, for example, that actually had, this very large enterprise customer, this was a few years ago, that actually had 22 people who were responsible for writing and optimizing SQL queries because they hadn't moved to a data warehousing style solution. And in fact, I taught them data warehousing because of the inefficiency of their processes. So, that's a pretty large scaled case, and that might not be appropriate to some of the people on the call. But one of the things that you want to start to think about when you're designing a BI solution is, where do I get my data from? And how am I going to retrieve that data in an efficient manner? Because frankly, although the points of integration with SharePoint are elegant, if your reports run horribly slowly because you've not optimized the underlying data store, then your solution's not going to be effective. And unfortunately, I found that to be the case more often than not in the real world. Now I'm really talking on here, and I know Mike has some real-world experience. So Mike, do you have anything to add before I jump into the Cube demo here?
When you talk about the difference between dimensional modeling and just relational modeling, when you're building your cubes, it's so much easier when you've got the dimensions and are able to link things together. But again, it's an iterative process that is going to take some time to get used to. But once you get used to it, it makes a lot of sense.
Right, and the other major thing with the cube, and if you're brand new to OLAP or data warehousing, and this is using a component that's part of SQL Server, it's in the box. Now, in terms of testing, you can actually install SQL Server analysis services on the same machine as SQL Server itself, from a practical standpoint, when you're going into production, you usually will install it onto a separate box just so that you can not have contention and so on and so forth. If you're not familiar with the concept of a cube or data warehouse, what it basically is it gets rid of all those join and indexing problems that you struggle with in a relational store. You can think of it as the biggest pivot table you've ever seen in the world, an Excel pivot table. And that's the way it's going to look. Inside of Management Studio here, just to give you a quick and dirty view of this type of data source, what we've done is we've taken the sample, which is AdventureWorks DW, and I'm going to show you inside the viewer here what the UI experience looks like, which you can then very easily replicate into SharePoint. So as Mike said, we have key areas that we want to monitor, and those are called measures. So in this case, this is a online plus brick and mortar sales example. So we've got some internet sales and we have some reseller sales. So we're just going to pull a couple of things in here, the internet sales amount. And the area that I'm working with is a visual query designer. In the world of analysis services, you have a different query language. You have multidimensional expressions because the underlying structure is different. And I won't lie to you, MDX is more complex than T-SQL, and it's one of the barriers to entry into the data warehousing world. However, what we've done in our tooling is we've encapsulated that in intelligent query designers so that for the most part, the amount of MDX that you're going to have to write manually is rather minimal. And that is very, very significant in terms of deciding whether to use this type of structure or not. So in any case, once you pull a measure over here, then you pull in what are called dimensions. This is where the name cube comes from. So if you can visualize each one of these items as the side of the cube, and I'm going to say product categories, and then I'm going to say geography. So we have a two-sided cube, if you will. Now, the reason I talk about pivot tables is because, of course, you can just pivot this. When I was actually, I was a business executive a long, long time ago, and I used to say, pivot it till you look good. That really appeals, even still, to business executives. And you can put multiple axes on a certain hierarchy, so on and so forth. So anyway, what's going on here is you've got a click-to-query environment. One of the challenges in building a BI or a reporting solution is end users and sponsors often, especially if you're building it new, cannot give you appropriate requirements as you're building along because they actually don't know because they haven't had sophisticated reporting. So a frustration that I had as a BI architect using OLTP sources, if you have to manually write all the queries in T-SQL and the requirements are continually changing, then it becomes a never-ending project. If you instead move to analysis services, you have a click-to-query model. So if someone comes and says, well, no, I want this or I want that, you simply can drag it, and that's going to generate the MDX query. Now you might say, well, what about the efficiency of these queries? The internal structures of the cube are such that although you can do manual query tuning, and you may do some in very, very large-scale implementations, it's not to the extent that you would do with manual index tuning. It's not even really a comparison. And these queries will run when you've set this thing up properly on the baseline 1,000% faster. And no, I didn't misspeak, 1,000% faster than relational queries. So the really compelling reasons to use this sort of underlying structure are that it's so much faster and it's a click-to-query environment. This isn't an analysis services webcast, so I'm going to have to get back to the SharePoint environment here quickly. But one of the things that I want to make sure that you take out of this today is to understand that you have these tools available and you can start looking at them. The AdventureWorks DW sample comes with the product, and actually it's what I wrote my book on. So if you wouldn't know how to even get started, really buy my book and you can get started and get it up and going within a day or two, and then you can start working with it. Now once you've selected your underlying data store, then we're going to talk about how we're going to integrate with SharePoint. And really what I'm hoping to do in this first part of my presentation today is to encourage more of you to take a look at using analysis services because of the flexibility and the speed. As I said, before I joined Microsoft, I was exclusively doing BI because of demand. And it was really a question of once people were exposed to it, it was pretty much they really wanted to have it. So I think it's just very important when you're building any kind of reporting solution, you know that it's there.
Hey, Lynn.
Go back to slides, yes.
I was just going to say that I did an 11-part webcast series on just BI and how it works with SQL 2005. If people are interested, in the comments, just go out to bencotips.com and click on the link for that series. You can see how that stuff also fits.
Great, wonderful. Okay, so that was a very, very brief introduction to BI. And now we want to move into what SharePoint has to offer in terms of reporting capabilities. So sort of the key aspect, and again this comes only with the full MOS product, is SharePoint Report Center. And as promised, we're going to do lots of demos. So let's go there. So inside of SharePoint, let me just get out of here and open up SharePoint. I have a sample portal which is built out, and inside of here we have a report section as it renders. And while this is coming back, let me just give you a great piece of information that I actually found this morning while I was doing research getting ready for this webcast. Because of demand, basically from you guys, we have now released a virtual PC image of SharePoint for you to play with as developers or implementers or whatever. And I'll be putting that link on my blog. You can now download it. This is really pretty unusual for us. We usually don't do this because virtual PCs include activated product. What we've done, of course, is we've time-bombed it. So the link will be on my blog, and if you wish to do this, you can have a fully configured development environment just to look around for 30 days. And it includes, I believe, this portal as well. So kind of interesting. So anyway, this is an out-of-the-box portal, which hasn't really had much customization done to it. And the area that you're going to be interested in designing your BI solution is a templated page of this portal, which is called Reports. And inside of here, you've got a number of pages that are basically SharePoint site types. And I did a webcast on this actually last week. If you're new to this, SharePoint is 100% ASP.NET 2.0 compatible. So these are basically ASPX pages, but sort of on steroids in that they are containers for chunks of UI content. These little things right here, which are called web parts. And in the case of the Reports Center in SharePoint, we have a specific type of template with specific types of web parts associated to it. Now inside of the Report Center, we have a couple of different types of templates. We have sort of the starting template here, and we have dashboards. There is a sample, and then I made another one. We have a Reports template page, and then we have data connections, report calendar, and reference library. Okay, so inside of here, if I actually go back, we've also got some intelligence in this reports sort of starting page in that under Site Actions, in addition to the typical edit and so on and so forth, we have this View Reports menu. So where these types of functionalities have come from is by Microsoft observing the most common usages. So this relates to putting reports into a document library and being able to, at just one click, grab the reports that I've checked out because I'm working on, so on and so forth. Okay? And all of these items are customizable. It just gives you, as a developer, a starting point. Okay, this is from the source XML files. Okay, so the core concept inside of the Reporting Center is this concept of the dashboard. So I'm actually going to click on the sample. To create a new dashboard, which is again just a template or a type, you'd click under Site Actions and create a new dashboard, but I'm not going to bother to do that because of time. And the idea of a dashboard is to take a key area of the business, and probably some of you are very familiar with this because you've done it manually, and to show an all-up on the key performance indicators, and then to show some drill down information. And in this particular case, this is being provided by Excel Web Services. Now, these are simply web parts that have been put up onto this page as a sample. And obviously your dashboards could be as simple or as sophisticated as need would be. Now, an interesting new product that we're releasing this fall, which is currently in CTP or Community Technology Preview or Beta, is something called Performance Point Management Server. And if your company needs more sophisticated dashboards, an example would be you need what's called a decomposition tree, where you have a hierarchical graphical representation of your data. In other words, we've got X amount of sales, and if we click this box, it'll expand into 2 boxes showing where it came from, each box will expand into 4 boxes showing where they came from, so on and so forth. We provide more sophisticated dashboarding as well as forecasting and budget planning templates through Performance Point Server, and you can grab a CTP on that as well. It's just something as developers you should be aware of if your dashboarding business requirements look more sophisticated than what you're seeing here. So on this page, we've got web parts. So again, not new and exciting, other than the fact we have specific types of web parts. If we click to add a web part, our gallery actually has intelligence, which suggests the web parts that are associated with reporting. You can see, for example, web parts that display business data from the business data catalog, from Excel, key performance indicators, so on and so forth. So in previous iterations of this series, we talked about how to create web parts, how to associate them with galleries, how to create templates. You can think of the Report Center as a more specialized type of template with more specialized type of web parts. All these objects are analogous to base classes if you're doing a lot of object-oriented programming, in that you can use them as starting points, and you can extend them or change them however might be necessary. So let's actually get out of here. So we're going to publish this page, our dashboard here. Everything also, by the way, in SharePoint 2007 is what's called security trimmed, which obviously is extremely important for reporting solutions. What that means is authorized users will only see those web parts, that data, those menu items, for example, which they are authorized to see. If they're not authorized, I'm in here as a full admin. If they're not authorized, they won't see it. The default authentication mechanism is Windows. However, one of the wonderful things about MOS 2007 is because it is fully ASP.NET 2.0 compatible, you can extend the authentication or change the authentication mechanisms, customize them. So if you wanted to put this on the public internet for partners, for example, and you wanted to use forms authentication, you could do that. Really any authentication mechanism that you wish to use, it's relatively easy to use. In fact, I was speaking at a user group this week in San Diego with a partner, and he did a really great presentation on that topic. And I have another webcast series that's starting up in July called Geek Speak, and he has asked if he could be on the one of the August iterations of that, so that he can present that information. Again, the schedule and time for that will be on my website. He has sample code, and what he did is it was very interesting actually. He used the zones capability of Internet Explorer to map to different providers using the ASP.NET membership provider model, so that parts of his reporting solution could be available for partners and parts could only be available for Active Directory users and so on and so forth. It's a pretty cool model, and I think pretty useful. There were a couple of people at the user group meeting that were actually going to take this out and implement it, so I think some of you on the call might like it as well. Okay, so we've got these very important web parts. So when you're designing the BI solution, one of the first things that you want to think about is, what do your report pages what do you need to have them look like? Can you use this reporting template inside of SharePoint as it is? Do you want to change it? Do you want to add web parts, remove web parts, or do you want to create your own page? One of the great things inside of SharePoint is that it is, being ASP.NET compatible, you can associate just plain old ASP.NET pages inside of a portal server if you want to. Another integration point that often was asked when I was working on this in the real world is, some of you might be using SQL Server reporting services, and this is just a blank instance just to kind of jog your mind in case you're using it. If you're not, this is basically a component of SQL Server 2005 that is optionally installed. It requires IIS, and it's a little ASP.NET website that allows simple display of reports. Now, a couple things that I want to make sure our developers know about this, I just know from having worked with the report services team as well. First of all, this architecture is a three-part architecture in reporting services. You've got a data source on the back end, and then you have a component in SQL to store metadata. The report structure, so on and so forth. It requires a couple databases on a SQL Server instance. And then you have a middle tier, which is providing your business logic and web services. And then you have this UI on the front end, which is a very, very simple ASP.NET website. Basically, it has folders, and inside those folders you have reports, and it just renders the reports out. Now, if you have implemented this, you've probably found that this site has quite a few limitations. I mean, really, basically all you get are folders with reports. Very, very simple. So what I found in the real world is most people who implemented SQL reporting services actually threw this UI away and created their own custom ASP.NET UI hooking into the SQL reporting services web services. In fact, the reporting services team has told me that there's no new development happening with this interface because sort of the direction going with reporting services is either A, you're going to integrate into SharePoint Reports Center by using the web parts that you can get for free that support pulling data in from SQL Server reporting services, web services, or B, developers are just creating their own ASP.NET web pages. So I think that's just an important thing to understand architecturally, that we're really not, it's not like we're dropping support for this or anything. We're just not enhancing it as we go forward. We're telling developers that if you want to integrate into the reporting in SharePoint, you want to go out and grab the web part. And to that end, I want to actually show you that because it's a very common question I get. By default, you do not get that web part, even if you have SQL Server available. So a very common question is, okay, I've got SQL Server reporting services, and I'm in MOS, and I'm looking in my report gallery, my web part gallery, and I don't see the web part that's going to allow me to display a SQL Server Reporting Services report on my report page. What gives? Well, here's the trick, and I'll put this information up on my blog. You have to install Service Pack 2 first into SQL Server. And secondly, you have to then go and grab, and this is all free stuff, a download web part that you have to have either your SharePoint admin or you, if you're the SharePoint admin, make available inside of SharePoint. So it's not there by default. You're not crazy. I know I spent lots of time looking for it because in the previous iteration it was there when you installed reporting services. So hopefully I can spare you some grief on that. Once you do install it, then associating a report that you've created here inside of your portal, it's simply a question of configuring the report web part by going in, as you would do typically, by going in and editing, modifying the shared web part. And then over in the properties of the web part, you simply, and I'm just sort of mocking it up here because I don't have the actual web part. So over in the properties of the web part, you'd simply have a dialog box where you'd put in the URL, because all the reports in SQL reporting services are URL addressable to the particular either folder or report, depending on what you wish to see. So it's a very, very simple manner of connecting it once you install that web part, but there are a couple of prerequisite steps to that. Okay, so I'm going to jump back and see. Mike, are there any questions in the queue? Because I feel like I'm just talking here.
There's actually a couple questions. One
Okay.
is talking about, a second here. One was talking about, are you going to be showing any examples of creating reports?
I can.
You can.
I can do that.
Will we have time? If we don't have time, there's other places we could direct them. The other
Right.
one is, can report services work off of MOS? Or can MOS and WSS work off of OpenXML, the new format for Office documents?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm assuming they're saying, how does as a data source, how does OpenXML work with MOS? And I'm wondering if they mean just general XML or XML coming out of Office documents like Word or Excel or something like that.
I'm guessing out of Excel.
Okay. Well, okay. Excel is a great sort of segue in. So let's see, where should I go? I guess, okay, I'll go back here then. So in the world of Excel, what we have happening is we have the ability, and I know maybe you won't have this reaction, but when I first heard about it, I actually thought, that's kind of strange, but I think it was just my own lack of understanding. We have this ability in the Enterprise Edition of MOS to centralize the distribution and display of Excel spreadsheets, and that's actually what's being shown on this dashboard page. Now, a couple things are happening here. So I'm answering your question by saying, yeah, you could actually you could pull the data out of a spreadsheet as XML data. You could do that. But if you have the appropriate version, I wouldn't think you'd need to go to all that trouble because, and I'm going here into the management interface, because it's a matter of, again, just click to set it up. Inside of, this is the administrative site, and I'm going to the shared services, which is a collection of application and security settings that can be applied to one or more SharePoint sites. And inside of here, we have a whole section on Excel services. So what you basically need to do is first make sure it's enabled, because strangely, well, not strangely, our approach when we're releasing products now is to turn off all the services until an administrator decides to turn them on. So even though you're working with the Enterprise Edition, you have to first enable the services, and you do that actually at the services level, one level above for your particular portal. So once you drill in, and again, this is more administrative than developer, but in my experience, I found that a lot of SharePoint developers have to kind of be SharePoint admins because there's so many new administrative concepts that it's the dev and the network admin kind of sitting down figuring it out together. And it has, in either case, it has to be set up properly or it won't work. So you're first specifying the security method. You're talking about load balancing, sessions, memory, and then caching. And so basically sort of scalability settings first. And this is sort of the key right here. Because you are, and being ASP.NET developers, this should make sense to you, because you're accessing data outside of the boundaries of your application, you'd want to specify from where you can get that data, because you wouldn't want just sort of random, your application can just go anywhere all over any file system or any file server. That would open up too many security vulnerabilities. So one of the key aspects of setting up Excel services is to specify the locations from which the workbooks can be read. Again, from a higher level, to make sure we understand the concept, the reason that we've included this functionality is, even though as devs we probably would love to see all data put into relational databases or analysis services because we understand the power of these tools, the reality is that there are tens of thousands of spreadsheets out there that are used day in and day out on people's desktops. And in building MOS, what we did is we tried to make that environment better by simply acknowledging the reality and saying, you know what, you can use the tools that you're comfortable with, end users, but we're going to centralize these spreadsheets so that companies don't suffer from different versions and constant version problems and email attachments and so on and so forth that clogs email traffic. We're going to centralize the hosting of this data in the format that you're comfortable with. So centralized spreadsheets hosted via the SharePoint environment in these trusted locations that can then be viewed, checked in, checked out, so on and so forth. And there's this single view of the truth in the method that you're comfortable with. So here I'm displaying Excel chart information, and if I click on this web part, I can actually open it up in Excel. And again, this has to be appropriately permissioned. So I know it's kind of a long answer to your question, but it's important that you understand from a positioning point where we're seeing open XML data from Office, particularly Excel, is we're recommending that you simply use Excel services rather than manually extracting the data. Now, to answer your question more completely, if you really wanted to go the route, you didn't have Excel services, you didn't want to use it or whatever, then you would use Business Data Catalog and set up any XML service or any XML source as a data source. and I don't know why this isn't opening. I think it's just my virtual PC. And basically, it would open up in Excel. Oh, it's some error with Excel, so it's probably the virtual PC. So in any case, so that's that. All right, now let me jump back and see, for purposes of completeness, what I haven't talked about in the demo yet. So, all right, so I showed you Report Center. Okay, so I didn't really talk about KPIs and why KPIs are so important. Prior to coming to the tech world, I was actually a business manager for more than 10 years, so I can really speak to this. I was vice president of a company and interacted with a lot of, top executives. And this is really the view of the world that the executives have to have. They don't have appropriate, time or resources to do the drill down. They really need to manage at the KPI level, so the key performance indicators. So, this has been a big ask from our customers, and we've implemented really strong support to make it easy for you as developers inside of MOS for this. The KPI web part supports KPIs that are created in SharePoint itself, in Excel, from a SharePoint list, or most interestingly from analysis services cubes. And displaying them via web parts is super simple. Matter of fact, let me show you what it looks like. Just to give you the full picture here, if I go back to my cube, and I should have some KPIs inside of here. But where would they be?
Hey, Lynn?
Yeah.
On that Excel example you just did, you need to have the version 2007 of Excel in order to make that work, right?
In order to open it, yes. Yes,
Yeah.
Good question, yeah. So I know I have some in here, so I just am going to go over to my sample, and I'm going to actually quickly try to let me make this a bit bigger so I don't have to scroll. Sorry for the screen res thing there. And I'm going to go up and back to reports, and I'm going to make a quick dashboard here and show you how you can hook KPIs to analysis services KPIs, which can be built off your cube, which is your enterprise data, which is really the optimal way to do it, because then you have all your data pulled in together. So I'm going to create a dashboard, which is a type that you can customize or create. And when you create a dashboard, I'm just going to call it A and call it A test. And you'll note that inside of here, create a KPI list for me automatically, allow me to select an existing KPI list later, or don't add one. So KPI is a central concept to this, so it's important for you to understand as a developer as well as the people who are creating the business requirements for you. And like I said earlier, if you need more sophisticated drill down capability than you got here, you could write it manually, but I encourage you to look at Performance Point as well. And I'll add a couple links to Performance Point webcasts, because we've got some already up on my blog as well, so you can take a look at that. So this is creating the default dashboard template for the Reporting Center, and you can see that we have these Excel web parts here by default. And you could get rid of these web parts if you wanted to by just closing them if you weren't using Excel services. It's just we're giving you a suggestion. And you could add the reporting services web part if that was what you were using. So now I'm going to create a new KPI, and you can see there, I wasn't lying, you've got indicator using data in SharePoint list, in Excel workbook, or from analysis services. And we would have to have a data connection to our cube. And then, do I have one? I don't know how much time I want to take with this. But the point I'm trying to make is it's a no-code solution. And if you've done your work in the, there's none. So I'm not going to actually bother, but I'll just kind of go through here. That you would then see the KPIs that you've created in analysis services. And you would see the values. And you can make KPIs in analysis services pretty sophisticated. You can make them dependent. So you can have, profits, for example, are dependent on, gross sales and net costs and cascading and drillable and all that kind of good stuff. Relatively easily, there are templates for KPIs because, of course, they're going to be written in analysis services in MDX. And I probably should just show you that really quick, because you're probably interested. You develop analysis services cubes using not Visual Studio, but you use the Business Intelligence Design Studio. If you've got analysis services installed and Visual Studio, there's just an extension into Visual Studio so that you can design in the environment you're familiar with. It's simply a template type called Business Intelligence. And I can just open the AdventureWorks sample and show you the KPIs inside of there that way. Because this is a really, really strong ask. Every BI solution that I've created had extensive KPIs in it. So you can see the BI project and analysis services if you were starting from scratch, but we're not. So we're going to open an existing one. And this is just the AdventureWorks DW sample. The sample, by the way, is great. It's one of the best SQL samples that I've seen in a long time, and I've been working with SQL since 6.5 in terms of usability. So I would really, really encourage you to use it if you are interested in this. So we're connecting here. It's reading the metadata from the server, which another kind of interesting aside is now written in XML, so it's a lot easier from a manageability standpoint. It used to be binary in the old version. Scriptable, all kinds of neat stuff. Once this comes up, then we'll drill into the cube, and I'll show you what the KPIs look like. And there's a little KPI browser as well. So this will show you kind of what the experience would be in SharePoint. It's designed to be pretty seamless. You just select once you have the connection and then make them available. And remember what the data warehouse holds. It holds an enterprise view, basically all the data that you wish to put. Gigabytes and gigabytes of data. While this is rendering, Mike, how's the question queue looking?
Not too bad. We've got a couple of questions on analysis services and credentials,
Okay.
But that's kind of outside the scope of
Okay.
this.
Okay.
Unless you're going to talk about how Moss is going to do authentication.
Well, like I said, the default is Windows, and everything will pass because the default for analysis services is Windows as well. And here, this is the cube, and it has the browser in it as well. But the neat thing about SharePoint now is it supports the ASP.NET 2.0 membership provider. So because there are going to be a lot of scenarios that are outside of Windows, that's just the reality of your reporting needs these days. And like I said, the guy that I worked with from the user group who showed setting it up by zone, I thought that was a particularly clever solution to basically partitioning your reporting solution. So he associated, in other words, some parts of his portal server with local intranet and so on and so forth, and he associated different authentication types with that. Another thing that I want to mention in terms of flexibility is, because a lot of developers are not familiar, SharePoint out of the box supports mobile. So more and more with the sophistication of mobile devices, the demand to have some sort of reporting functionality pushed out to mobile is part of the business requirements. And a great part of SharePoint is that it supports it right out of the box. So anyway, so I'm in AdventureWorks. There's our good old browser, and if I go to KPIs, I can see that I've got a bunch of KPIs here. And if I go to the browser view, and this is the MDX, because I know this is a dev talk and I have to show some code or you'll be mad at me. And you can see that we've got a rich visualization just inside of the developer tool, which is really kind of neat, that is fully supported in SharePoint. So this is nested, what I was talking about. So you've got net income, here's the value, the goal, status, trend, and you can put weighting to KPIs. So in other words, this one is worth more than the other one. And this is just such an obvious thing that should be part of every BI solution that I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't show it to you. What is interesting about this sample is that this is built against your enterprise data that's held in one single container, one single cube, rather than against individual spreadsheets, whether they're centrally stored on SharePoint or on people's desktops or lists on the SharePoint server or whatever. This is the one view of the truth that really has that high business value. So that's what KPIs look like And if you were interested in coding, as I said, there's lots and lots of examples in terms of templates. But they're all KPIs. And you just simply, it's a right-click environment. You just right-click New KPI, and then pull it out over here, and you can see you've got the value, the goal, the status, and additional properties, which are the weighting and the trend. So, okay, so let me pop back. KPIs are very popular, very, very needed. Oh, okay, and going on. So I showed that. Okay, the business data catalog. In case you didn't catch our other webcast, the business data catalog is a no-code solution that allows you to expose data into SharePoint Portal Server UI. And the way that you set it up is you have the appropriate version of MOS, and then you create either manually an XML file, which is called an ADF, an application definition file, or you use one of the tools that are being made available on the web to map. And what the ADF file looks like is kind of a sophisticated data set. What I mean by that is, let's say you have a sort of almost a relational type of source. You're going to have table names become elements and column names become attributes, and the data types come over as additional attribute information, so the data is strongly typed. Why it's more intelligent than a traditional data set definition is because it includes information on permissions, which will be honored, and permissions on actions, like the ability to update, so on and so forth. Now the business data catalog web parts that come with SharePoint are pretty extensive. You can display them, and I'm going to jump over and show you again. You can display that information, and I'll go to my sample dashboard here and I'll edit the page using the default business data catalog web parts on a dashboard page, or really on any page that you might want. And the concept is not only to display sort of reports, but also you can use business data catalog information as filters. So a business scenario would be you have a list of all customers who have outstanding invoices in your payment system, and then you have a list of all customers in your CRM system. And you want to get a filter list from your invoicing system and pass parameters, customer names, to your CRM system. And you can do that with these web parts with writing no code, basically. So it starts with something as simple as a list, and it moves into more sophisticated filtering. And let's see if I can show you that. The other thing that's, see, here's the filters. Business data catalog filter. Filter the contents of web parts using a list of values from the business data catalog. The other thing that's really powerful about business data catalog, and where's my search web parts? Here we go, is that this business data can now be returned as part of search results. And that is defined in the ADF itself as well, whether or not the business data source should participate in searches. So if you just take a minute to think about how much time this can save you as a developer. You write a single XML file, and the data can now be returned into your portal as filters, as part of reports, and as part of the sophisticated search engine that's part of MOS with writing no code. I mean, to me, that's one of the most compelling parts of the enterprise implementation of MOS, because having done quite a bit of ADO.NET in ASP.NET websites before this was all available, I have some sense of how long this can take in the real world, and it's night and day. It's literally days and weeks rather than months, and I mean that translates into real business value. So, as I thought, we have just a few minutes left. See if there's anything else that I can pop in before we get to the final questions. We talked about Excel services, and I showed Excel services. I talked very briefly about what's going on with reporting services, and I showed that. So I think I feel out of breath. I don't know how those of you listening feel, but I feel out of breath. I think I actually got an introduction to everything in an hour. What I was trying to impart to all of you is the deep level of integration that we've accomplished in this version of the product. It really is, I think, pretty strong offering. We've got so much there for you as developers to start with so that you can get up and running very, very quickly, from the Report Center, which has all the rich templates, the dashboards, and the web parts, to the deep integration with the other products in our suite, most particularly analysis services. I didn't get to touch on data mining at all, which is using the analysis services engine, to discover patterns in immense amounts of data, and that can have a tremendous business value as well. So I'll post links up on my website because I'm hoping that if I've done my job, I'm inspiring you to learn more about some of these technologies. So that being said, resources post-webcast here are my blog, blogs.msdn.com/SoCalDevGal, and searching on the SharePoint or Moss tags, and Mike's blog, which is benkotips.com. We have one more official scheduled webcast in this series, although Mike and I have been talking about continuing it beyond that. The next one will be on July 6th at noon. It's going to be on SharePoint and Windows Workflow Foundation, so SharePoint and workflows. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it back over to our producer, and then we'll follow up after she's done by answering any questions.
All right, thank you so much, Lynn. And if you do have questions for Lynn, you can go ahead and submit those now using the questions and answers pane in the lower right-hand corner of your interface, and we will get to those in just a minute. I'd also like to remind everyone that you can print a PDF of the slides by going up to the File menu and selecting the Print PDF option. Also, watch your inbox tomorrow for an email with information about viewing this webcast on demand and downloading a PowerPoint. When you fill out your webcast evaluation today, you can win a Microsoft Zune 30 gigabit digital media player. So I do encourage you to fill that out, and I'll be launching that right now. All you need to do to fill it out is click the links that you see in the middle of your screen. We do appreciate your feedback. We like to read all your comments, so please do fill this out. It helps us to improve our future webcasts. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn the time back over to Lynn.
Great. Okay, I'm just answering questions in the queue. There were a couple of them that were kind of specialized, so I answered them privately. Let's see, what do we got here? How to create folders in Report Center, create them somewhere else to get Report Center inside of a subsite, not to a level. Okay, so I think what Karen is asking here is she wants to see the contents of a folder inside of SharePoint. So in the reporting web parts that you can get for free, you've got Report Viewer, and Report Viewer allows you to target either to a folder or to an individual report because it's URL addressable from SQL Server reporting services. So if you want to go to a subsite, then you simply specify the URL of either the particular report or the particular folder that is a subfolder. And I have had people do that in production to kind of hide things. In other words, create a folder hierarchy in SQL Server reporting services on the default website, but don't really use that. Rather use the reporting services web part in SharePoint and then just target it. Okay, yeah, so that looks like that was what you were asking. Okay, and then I have another question here. We've had issues with using analysis services in the BI web parts due to issues with passing credentials and the multi-hop. Okay, on this question, I have heard of this before. It depends on how you have your installation set up. If you have like a farm, or if you have basically how your installation is set up. So for this person that's asking this, it's Joe. If you can just send me mail on my blog giving me your configuration, then I can address that, and I'll try to generalize that back either on my blog or the next time I talk. So. All right, and with that, I think that I've answered all questions. So thanks for listening in. Hopefully it was a good hour for you, and hope that you can join us for future webcasts.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Lynn and Mike, for your presentation today. I'd like to remind everyone once more to fill out the survey prior to exiting the session room. Thank you all for joining us today. You may now disconnect from the audio portion of today's conference.